So you may be wondering what the title and the content of the keynote I'm going to provide for you the next few minutes, and hopefully we'll have some time for some Q&A. I'm actually going to talk a little bit about this connection between the work that we're doing here today and the work that I also do in my role at Brookings as a senior fellow. First and foremost, as a senior fellow at Brookings and director of the Center for Technology Innovation, I, like all of you, am completely interested in what we're going to do to ensure that we have democratized and equitable artificial intelligence technologies. And the reason that I have been so enamored with this topic, as a sociologist, by the way, really started almost 5 or 6 years ago when a woman by the name of LaTanya Sweeney was the Chief Technology Officer at the Federal Trade Commission. She had put together a workshop on big data and asked people to actually participate in panels, but also to sit in the audience. And at one point, she put up on the screen, and I just want you to imagine this for just a moment. She wanted all of us in the room to look at a screen that was celebrating the 100th anniversary of a Black fraternity. The fraternity happens to be the one in which my father was a member, the Omega Psi Phi fraternity. And she said they were celebrating their 100th year, but I want all of you in the audience to take a few seconds and to see what jumps on the screen of the anniversary website, where you would obviously get the hotel information, find out the agenda, etc. We really didn't know what she was talking about 5 or 6 years ago, but we did as she obliged, and we watched that screen for 30 seconds, and within that period of time, get your arrest record for free popped up as the first ad. The next ad was the highest interest credit card offering that was completely predatory and targeted to Black men. I didn't quite understand at the time what that meant, except that here was a fraternity celebrating the 100th anniversary, but was inundated before any of us in this room began to talk about AI as its own form. But big data had gotten in and inundated this website with predatory lending and financial services. For me, that was the first day that I took this seriously. And since that time, we have seen, and you talked a lot about this today, artificial intelligence be interjected into the eligibility decisions for people to get credit and housing. The ability of people to be denied bail is often based on artificial intelligence. I just read on LinkedIn that a woman got $2 million back because an algorithm had denied her ability to get employment, and so that was the recourse for some of the quality of life that she had regressed on due to a machine learning model. I am most struck, in all honesty, after spending a year and a half on the National Academies of Sciences Facial Recognition Committee, on the example of Portia Woodruff, who was a Black woman who was in the city of Detroit that was picked up by the police 8 months pregnant in front of her children because she was believed to be someone who had just robbed a convenience store. Portia Woodruff almost had a miscarriage in that police department, and she turned out not being the person who was in the robbery, because the person in the robbery, she may have been a Black woman, but she was not pregnant. These are the things that keep me up at night, because it speaks to two areas in which I want to encompass that is really part of the nature of the work that I do every day. First and foremost, it means that all of us in this room have a whole lot more work to do. That just because we have found ourselves in a space where we could talk about with some maturity about the technical cadence of artificial intelligence, and we could speak to these consequential outcomes, we've got so much more work to do because we have not solved them. And each and every day, there's a person where an algorithmic model or an autonomous decision is actually pervading the consequences for their life and intruding and eroding their quality of life in ways that is so much harder to return that. Portia Woodruff in Detroit has to sue the whole city of Detroit after she paid to get out of jail. Because for people who look like me, it's not free when you actually are traumatized by institutions that look at you in a certain way or believe you to be that predictive nature of whether or not you're going to be a criminal. My point is, all of us today who have been involved in our discussions, we need you because we have so much more that we have to imagine for the good and so much that we have to do to actually reel in the bad. But there's a common denominator when we begin to think about the people who are most affected by these systems. They tend to be, the title of my book, digitally invisible. And what I mean by that, they tend not to be seen. Or if they are seen, they tend to be seen under the traumatized lens of the information that is curated about their experiences. That's why we see facial recognition more problematic in Black communities that are highly surveilled versus other communities where they're not. That's why we see AI have challenges when it comes to skin color and simple pulsometers, right? Because the melanin of the skin cannot actually be correctly read. That's why in health, we often see the continuation of disparities, because representation in clinical trials do not represent women or other people of different backgrounds who actually contribute to science. These are questions that we have to ask ourselves. Are we including the digitally invisible in our conversations as AI ethicists and practitioners and activists? You know, I started my book, and many of you asked me, how long did it take? In all honesty, it took all my life because I started this work out of graduate school, right? But it took me 4 years simply because I wanted to go into the communities where people lived to ask them questions about their access to the internet. So this book took me to several places. It took me to Phoenix, Arizona, where I actually visited a school. It was an Apple school. In this case, every Latina kid in Maricopa County carried a cell phone, which I was like, this is great. That means that every kid is connected to the internet, only to find out they carried a cell phone as a means of communication if a parent was illegally detained or deported. In that same city, I went down to a library trying to figure out if there was internet access in the library, and I met a young lady named Frances who was arguing with the librarian, and these are all in the book, about why she did not have a library card. And so, of course, I was kind of creepy. I walked out when she left and said, hey, Frances, I heard you, or hey, lady, I heard you talking about a library card. I'm doing a book on the internet. Why was that so important to you? And what I thought was going to be a 15-minute conversation turned to 2 hours because she needed a library card because she had stage 4 breast cancer. And the only way that she could communicate with her doctor was through a public library. Anybody here in this room talk to your doctor at a public kiosk at a library? Anybody in this room have to use public internet to do private transactions? My book took me to rural Alabama, where I met this wonderful teacher, Dr. Kathy Trimble, who I'm still friends with to this day. Her school was a K through 12 school in the most rural part of Alabama, right outside of Birmingham. I swear I'm a city girl. I didn't know where I was going. I was getting a little nervous, right? But when I showed up, each of those kids had an iPad under their arm, as well as a cell phone in their hand, because they had benefited from an initiative under Barack Obama, which was called Connect Ed. This was before the pandemic, where Kathy Trimble was telling me, even though my kids do not make it to the top of the state's test scores, they have imagination and enthusiasm based on what these tablets can do. 2 weeks later, the pandemic hit. I called Dr. Trimble to check on her, and she sent me the most distressing email that I put in the book. She said, well, Nick, I can't find my kids. We're not able to give them internet access the way that they used to come to the school because the buses aren't running. And now it appears that those tablets are like books without paper because my kids cannot learn. I long for their learning is basically what she told me in this email, what she continues to tell me to this day. Or let me just take you into rural America, where I actually met some health educators in a place called Garrett County, Maryland, just 2 hours outside of Washington, D.C., which has more cows literally than people, because I almost hit a couple. I don't know what happened. The GPS went out. I found myself on a farm. I was a little nervous, too, because that cow did not look too happy. But what I found there is that in this very rural Amish town, because this has no color, folks, this digitally invisible community, health educators went 2 hours to a patient's home, 2 hours back to the office to put in the case notes, and often 2 to 3 weeks before they went back to care for them. Why do I bring this up at an AI conference? Having digital equity is a precursor, folks, for us to have true AI equity. We can't build all these tools that are going to change the nature of people's lives if they cannot get access to these tools right now. I spent a lot of time in education and health and other places. We just started at Brookings what I call an AI equity lab. It was my back of the napkin way of saying that sociologists and philosophers and practitioners and others could actually come to the table, much like we do at PAI, and talk about these issues in ways that they workshop high risk, possible discriminatory applications in ways that help manage what those consequences are. We actually just finished up a couple of reports on education, healthcare, and journalistic integrity. But my point is, we have to see the connection between the digitally invisible and just basic everyday internet access and what we are doing as we navigate through high scale, high quality, highly distributed computing. We will not affect that kid in Birmingham in the same way that we'll affect that kid in Silicon Valley if there's not access to the internet. And I will be the first and probably the last person in DC to continue to say that. Equity across the board pushes visibility. Some people have asked me, why did I call this book Digitally Invisible? I read a book one time by the author Ralph Ellison, who wrote about a protagonist that no matter what they did, no one saw them. Now listen, I stand here before you. I've been in this space for 30 years, and I can tell you I was very invisible in many spaces that I walked into. As a woman and a woman of color, I still consider myself to be a hidden figure, oftentimes among decision makers here. But my point is, we all have a responsibility to make the visible seen. This is no longer one about who is going to develop the best cadence when it comes to technology, who's going to have the most imaginative application. Couple things that we need to worry about. Who's sitting at the table alongside of you, and who is going to have reach to what the capability can do. I've been in this space long enough. I know I look about 15, psych, to know when you had cassette tape players and you had to use a pen to actually get the media to actually revel, right? I've been around long enough when analog was the only way to go with rabbit ears on televisions and we didn't have HD TV and 4K. I've been around long enough that I even had a VHS player. I know some of the young people like, what is she talking about, right? My point is, technology continues to ebb and flow, and we're in the middle of this synergistic time. But what good are we if we actually don't find ways to make people more visible? So I know I sound like a preacher. In fact, I won't pass around a collection plate. Instead, I'm going to leave you with just a couple of points, and hopefully you'll have some questions. First and foremost, we have to grapple with our own norms, values, and assumptions about the world. I urge all of you at its partner forum to think about who are you and what do you bring to the table. Sometimes the things that we bring to the table are our own lived experiences, and those things will actually help us create better technology that is based in the public interest. But sometimes our values and norms may get in the way of us seeing Frances from the library, who has to go there because she has no other option. Grapple with those values, norms, and assumptions that you have about yourself and the world. It will make you a better AI practitioner when you come to the table and you realize the things that you don't know. The best paper I ever wrote as a sociologist in AI was sitting alongside a lawyer and an engineer. The engineer and I could not stand each other. To this day, we've made up. And fortunately, the lawyer made us get along because we had a long paper to write. It was the longest paper. That paper took about over a year because I could not bow down to the engineer and he could not to a sociologist. But my point is, that was the best paper that I wrote, because it gave me an opportunity to question the way in which I thought about my methodology and my philosophy and ideology about the world, to create better technology and honestly a better paper. That paper has been used probably over 100,000 times in various coursework a year based on our synergistic understanding. The engineer, by the way, was a man by the name Paul Resnick, who I've known for 30 years. If you know Paul, he is a straight mathematician, and we went back and forth until we got to a middle, and I've known him for over 20 years. The second thing I would say to all of you is to think about the sociocultural context in which these technologies live. They just don't live in a lab. They live in a world. They live in a world where people like Portia Woodruff live, They live in a world where those kids in Phoenix live. They live in a world where people like Kathy Trimble will actually have to, as an educator, take on AI, not knowing the consequences to her kids. And for me, that's personal because she's a protector of her students. And who are we to take that protection away? So values, norms, assumptions, understanding context, they really matter in this debate because it determines whether or not you're going to be part of the solution or you're going to further the problem. And I don't think there's many of us in this room that want to earnestly say that we want to be part of the problem. Am I right about that? If you are, it's okay, just don't tell nobody. Right? But the key thing is, we've got to be part of the solution. And most importantly, we have to build accountability. I'm a real big person. If you follow my work, there are two things I love. I love the digital divide / AI, because I kind of see them living in the same space. And I just love rating systems and feedback and interrogation of AI systems. I know it's weird. On one hand, I write a book on digital invisible, and then you probably will find me in an article on rating systems in AI. I just published something recently on that. Why do I do that? Because we just need more accountability. Just because you're not a computer scientist doesn't mean that you cannot interrogate these models. And I spent a lot of time trying to bring these gray spaces towards the center. Are you doing that in your work? Question yourself. Are you sitting on one side where you're just looking at the technical computations and not necessarily looking at the sociocultural or socioeconomic outcomes? Or are you too focused on the public interest outcomes that you don't understand the technology? For us to be better public interest stewards of this technology, and for us to want to bridge digital equity and AI equity, we also have to interrogate the technologies even when we design them. I tell people all the time, I'm okay with being wrong because I'm not a computer scientist. If there are things that I don't understand, I've spent a lot of time understanding differential noise and treatment and how you actually can play around with all the variables. In fact, someone said, I know you have a PhD in sociology, you should go get a data science degree. And I said, no. I don't want to go back to school right now, right? But I will listen and I will learn and take it all in. But I do ask a lot of questions. Are you asking the right questions? Are you having the right people at the table? Are you questioning your own values? And most importantly, are you being part of the solution? I just want to end with all of you saying this. This is hard work. No one said this would be easy. I've been doing technology policy for 30 years. I testified when I was 20 years old in front of Capitol Hill. Testified about 10 times last year, no policy got passed though. I'm anticipating I might have a break in the next 4 years, so we'll see, right? Might work on my next book. My point is, I know I tell people I could have been a comedian if I didn't do technology, but there's always a chance. My point is, are you putting your best self forward? And if there are things that you don't know, are you getting with other people so you can show your best foot forward? I didn't come here to admonish anybody. I came here in a community of friends and colleagues. And I came also to share that the work that we do is just not about our little vacuum, but it's about all these people in this book. Let's make sure that we don't develop computing systems that actually perpetuate the same inequalities, but at the same time, making sure we don't also find ourselves perpetuating the same values, norms, and assumptions that we have about the world and pushing that onto somebody else. The world is done being a commodity. So people want to reimagine and be free for what the world has to offer in terms of innovation. And I'm excited about that. And I hope all of you are too. Thank you, Rebecca, for this opportunity. Thank you, all of you, for the work you do. I've met so many wonderful people. I expect all of you to find me on LinkedIn so we can all stay connected. And if you didn't get a free book, I'm sorry, because we only have one out there and Dawn has it. She's raffling it to the highest bidder. But you can also get it at Barnes & Nobles and online at Amazon, and any independent bookseller where books are sold. Thank you, everybody. I so appreciate this opportunity. I know, this is what I do. I think I ran out of time for questions, right?
You might have 4 minutes.
Oh, do I? Oh, Lord, that's the first time I've ever been on time. I was looking at this thing and I was like, do I have enough time for questions? Because I had only 20 minutes. So if you all, let's have some questions. Bill, come on, come with it.
The digital divide has been around a long time. Is it time that we treat broadband access like a utility and maybe have something along the equivalent of a universal service fund to make sure everyone has that access?
I love that. You must have read a little bit about my book, Bill, when I gave it to you. You know, I actually love that question because I've been around with the digital divide since Larry Irving, who's a good friend of mine, and Michael Powell and B.K. Fulton, all these people created the term. In fact, I was telling Larry, I used to follow all the reports under President Clinton, by the way, when the digital divide was actually developed. And if you read the book, you'll find out that I actually opened up community technology centers when people were dealing with access of whether they were connected or not connected. And back then, we were talking about 386 computers. We were not talking about the computers that we know today. I do think that that's still a constraining term, though, and that's something that I actually talk about in the book, that we keep talking about the digital divide as the haves and the have-nots, which creates it as a binary construct. And the technology that we know today has no boundaries. And so when we treat it as who has a laptop, who doesn't, like what we found in the pandemic, 53 million school-age kids went home, 35% of them did not have technology access at home, about a good 25 to 30 million also didn't have a laptop. So what do schools do? They went out and they found laptops, et cetera. Now they're struggling because they don't have any money to keep those laptops in the school, by the way. We keep this as a program. And I'm basically suggesting that being connected is a digital competitiveness issue. And I talk about that in the book. We need to move away from this being programmatic, because when you make it programmatic, you also make it partisan. And so how can we, for example, as AI professionals, talk about, distributed computing power and being able to do advanced capability models, autonomous cars and decision makings, and we're still treating digital access as if it's a programmatic, a partisan issue. And if you read the book, you'll see I've been around since Clinton, believe it or not. Every Democratic and Republican president has followed a theme. They either fund it or they take it away, or they fund it or they take it away, right? Look at what's happening now. President Biden put the most money in digital access through the BEAD program, which is the infrastructure bill, but now it's being threatened to be taken away, even though all 50 states have actually gotten money. So I think you're right. We need to look at universal service as a question of that. The challenge is, it's a quick lesson, universal service is based on cable monopolies. And I don't know how many people still have cable. That's part of the challenge. So we can't fund it. And so now we're figuring out how to fund it. You had your hand up?
I was just gonna say, like, can't we just skip over broadband with space? Like,
Boy, you just made me almost want to choke. That's the newest thing, right? Because, excuse me. So we have another concern now because of space becoming a very important issue. Now, the interesting thing about space is you're right. We've come a very long way when it comes to space policy, but space broadband-enabled access is still relatively expensive. You still have to have good line of sight. Many of us live in urban areas. It does not necessarily mean we have good line of sight. When I was doing my visits across the country in rural communities, the house was as big as the satellite dish outside, right? But the satellite dish was for cable linear programming. It was not for broadband. I'm interested in seeing how it pans out because space has not traditionally been one of the communication services. So it'll be interesting to see if it actually even gets government money for it. Because right now, it's not a carve-out in any of the government funding spends when it comes to broadband. So I think that we need a model that's more technology agnostic, and we should honor where people live and what works for them. So in my studies, I found, for example, for some communities, just having straight Wi-Fi works. Other communities, you need a fixed wire line. You know what I mean? Other communities, space could be an option. The key thing is you got to get it to where people are at, right? And you have to have flexibility in programs. When it's political, there's less flexibility. Yeah, it's gonna be interesting. I mean, I'm probably now on, I don't know about other people, 5 LEO, 5 Leo committees now who are trying to figure out the space connection. As you know, Jeremy, there's a certain guy that's had somebody's ear in Washington. You know, I don't say his name because I've been in too many meetings where I've brought out the jar and I told people every time you say that name, you have to give me $1. And I've already made 50. So I'm not gonna like go back on what I tell people, but there's a certain person who has that influence. So it's gonna be interesting to see if space becomes a predominant way of broadband access. Although it's still too expensive in terms of our ability to do it at this point. Any last questions? All right.